Good afternoon, everyone. It's just 12:01, so I can say afternoon. I'm Amherst Williams. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut League of History Organizations, and I want to welcome you today to the last in our series of webinars on newspaper digitization in collaboration with the Connecticut State Library's Connecticut Digital Newspaper Project. We're really excited to close out the series today with something a little bit more informal that will hopefully give everyone the opportunity to kind of have conversations with the folks who have kind of done this on the ground, who have worked with the folks at CDNP and who have been working on newspaper digitization projects of their own, either ones they've completed or ones that are in process right now. As always, the recording of this will be available on our YouTube channel, and we'll go out in an email to all registrants afterward. And if you have any questions as we go, feel free to pop them in the chat. Both Emily and I from CLHO are here to help field those. But in just a moment, I'm going to hand things over to Gail Hurley, who is the co-director of the Connecticut Digital Newspaper Project. And we also have with us today, although I think lurking in the background for now, Anna Newman and Nicole Beskier, also from the Connecticut Digital Newspaper Project, faces that you should know very well by now if you've been watching these sessions so far. So Gail, I'm going to hand things over to you and you can introduce our panel today.
All right, sounds great. Thanks, Amherst. So as she said, this is our last of our series, our kind of Ask Our Peers. How we're going to do this is we are going to give each of our panelists, who I will introduce in a second, some time to talk about their local digitization projects. And then we will have a moderated Q&A section, followed by, at the end, plenty of time, hopefully, for you to all ask your questions for either the panel or any of us on the digital newspaper project from the State Library. So we have with us today Patrick McGlamory, who is the Technical Services Librarian at the Deep River Public Library. We also have Samantha Lee, who is Head of Reference Services at Enfield Public Library. And we have Karen Goodell, who is the Director of the Scoville Memorial Library in Salisbury. So thank you all for being here with us today. So we're going to kick off, I think, with Patrick. If you'd like to tell us a little bit about the project from Deep River. I think you're muted.
Sure. First, let me tell you a little bit about who I am. I'm the retired librarian from the University of Connecticut. I was the librarian there for 24 years. I was also an adjunct professor for Simmons and taught digital libraries course in Vietnam and in Massachusetts. So when I retired, we moved to Deep River and I started working at the library just a bit. And I noticed a microfilm in the corner and had to be the guy who had to help with that antiquated piece of equipment. It moved to the Historical Society. It kind of bumped around. We all realized it was really an important resource for not just the town of Deep River, but the region of the lower Connecticut River Valley. And we began to talk about how we might make more use of it. So I'm going to read a little bit, then I'm going to talk more specifically about things. When we what we refer to as the New Era was actually three businesses. The New Era published in Chester from 1874 to 1882. The Deep River New Era, published in Deep River from 1882 to 1938, and the New Era, published in Deep River from 1938 to 1977. It was a newspaper serving the lower Connecticut River Valley communities of Haddam, Chester, Saybrook, Deep River, and Winthrop, Essex with Cinderbrook and Ivoryton, Old Saybrook, Lyme, and Old Lyme. It was issued in microfilm from the Connecticut State Library as part of the Connecticut Newspaper Project in exchange for loaning the library its original copies to the New Era from 1774 to 1936. The State Library helped the Society pay for placing the nearly entire 103-year run of the New Era on 70 reels of microfilm. The process of microfilming changed the New Era from being a collection of 6,760 weekly newsprint issues to being 64 rolls of microfilm, each with some 800 plus images. We all remember those microfilms. What you're looking for is at the end of the reel. So you have to get to it and then rewind it. In the intervening 20 years, technology shifted again. During the COVID pandemic, Robert Webb of Charter Oak Scanning offered to scan the rolls in exchange for the existing equipment and has scanned the entire holdings. During the pandemic, he saw the benefit of doing this and working with all archival organizations like ours. And at this point, though I'm working at the library, I'm working with the Historical Society in order to make this project move forward. So he purchased a contemporary scanner and was able to scan at the high resolution and at the speed that he needed in order to progress along with it. We have the right to make materials published before 1926 available to the user community. This is a truism in American copyright, is that works published in the US prior to 1926 are in the public domain. Okay. So our task is basically to break the page images back into weekly as they were originally published. They become more manageable to the users, smaller, easier to download and to do the research from. Give each page image a unique information-dense file name, including date, volume, and number, and page number. Upload the images to the Connecticut Digital Archive so that they can be discovered to the user community, searched, and downloaded. I'm actually reading from a procedure that I created for this, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, why I've gone to all the extent to really write out a very detailed workflow and procedure list that I can share with others. But those are the tasks. Sounds pretty simple. This protocol is divided into 4 parts or workflow to extract the TIFFs out of the Charter Oak scans, which they've supplied in a PDF file. Why? I don't know, but that's how they came to us. And when you get something at a good deal, you really don't look the gift horse. Deal with what you're given and then figure out how to do it. Using Fast Stone Image Viewer to break the roll into weeklies. Labor intensive, going through and basically taking a roll and breaking it into each weekly, evaluating it, choosing the right one, and then joining it together with a file name for that particular weekly. Using the Fast Stone Image Viewer to rename the files with the information disk file names, and 4, uploading and ingesting the image data, metadata, and do quality control. Okay. The next piece really is perhaps the most difficult, and this is kind of the reason why I started to do this, not because I like digital libraries. I built the map and geographical information center magic that you may know about at the University of Connecticut. But I also like the idea of librarians making known what it is that their skill set is and sharing it with others. So when I approached the Historical Society, I kind of said, okay, this is what I do. And there was a lot of discussion about, who has the copyright, how should we do it, and so on and so forth, all of this, which is actually basically good librarianship to kind of put that all out there so we know where we are. And also to bring those folks along with us. As this has progressed, and I've kind of played it out, I began to realize that we're really dealing with primary towns of Saybrook, which was Saybrook until 1947, when it became what we know as the town of Deep River, and the village of Winthrop, Old Saybrook, Chester, Essex, Lyme, Haddam, and Old Lyme. All of those towns have all of those families' histories in this 103-year-old newspaper. So that really kind of drove me to want to make it happen. And now I'm kind of at the point of, okay, how do I herd all these cats? All these, the 169 towns, and I have 8 towns, something like that, and probably more as we go farther into the newspaper. Towns will become on board. It's always bothered me in Connecticut and New England, frankly, because I'm originally from Maine, that there's a town line and things seem to stop at the town line and we don't really pay attention to both sides. But in the lower Connecticut River Valley, we all share a very common history. And the families flow from one town to another town, and it's just so you're really talking about the whole region. So we're talking about librarians, and then we get the other cat in there, and that's the historians and the archivists. Cousins, both interested in the same thing, more or less, but also very clear about, trying to be very clear about what they do. So when I did this workflow, I broke it into very, very, very discrete tasks that could be done by a community which is overlooked in today's age, and that is retirees, professionals, people who are looking for a way to continue to do service, and something that can be done. And what I have in mind here is the cold winter months. You're tired of looking at reality TV, you're and on and on and on. So you've got these folks, and many of them have computer skills. So now it's a matter of bringing these folks together, the librarians and historians, and then having them find the people in their community who can do this and put their name in the metadata as the folks who have done it. So I want to mention the three-legged stool: cheap, fast, and good. You can pick two. It can be cheap and good, but it's not going to be fast. It can be good and fast, but it's not going to be cheap. Okay, you get the idea. There's no grant money that we've been able to locate for this. Certainly not enough to do the whole thing. And so what we in Deep River decided to do was to go ahead and start the process and see what could happen and see how it goes. So I'll wrap it up with this. We are at the point where we're ready to buy the donuts, invite the library directors and the librarians and the historical society directors, and see how we can take it to the next step. And I will present my procedures and how I see it going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. So next, I think we're going to hear from Sam at Enfield.
Hello, folks. So I inherited the newspaper digitization project at Enfield when I first took this position almost 6 years ago. At that point in Enfield, we had digitized the newspaper of record from 1880 to 1959. That run was under the Thompson Built Press. We went through a vendor to do that. So we had always historically microfilmed our newspapers. And then as formats changed and the wish for accessibility became possible, we started digitizing them as well with New England Micrographics. Mike Monahan was a gentleman we worked with. He is brilliant and super easy to work with. But essentially, I didn't start that project. I inherited it and carried it on. So at the time, the formats that we had were high quality TIFF images and then PDF images that had OCR text enabled. And most of that was already uploaded. Some of that was uploaded into CTDA, and with a lot of grace from Gail, especially, we were able to get up to 1959 uploaded on CTDA, and our patrons have been delighted. They've been able to use the text searching capabilities and get images. Once we trained our patrons to use CTDA, they were easily downloading the PDFs and printing off things for their scrapbooks or updating images and the like. So while we had 1880 to 1959, we knew that we wanted to keep digitizing as much as we can. In February of 2020, our newspaper of record actually folded. It was bought out, and then it ceased publication. So it was really important to us at that point that we digitized the entire run of this newspaper up to February of 2020. And we scrambled to do that with New England Micrographics. So we covered 1960 to 2020. We digitized that in the 2 years of the pandemic. Money was no longer going into microfilming, obviously, so it went straight into digitizing. And so we have that on external hard drives at the library in multiple places for backups, and we are slowly, tortuously working on uploading it onto CTDA. Unfortunately, I have not been very good at uploading or following the instructions provided by Gail. I have authentication problems, so we can discuss that or not later on. But our patrons do know that we have the digitized entirety of the Enfield press and the Thompsonville press from 1880 to 2020. And they're happy to come into the library and talk to us and use it. But that's all from Enfield.
Thank you, Sam. And yeah, I'd love to talk to you about those later years and see what we can do. Okay, next we have Karen.
Hi, everyone. I'll give you a little bit about my background here. I've been the director at Scoville since December of 2021. So I also inherited this project. It was almost really completed by the time I started here, and I'm just following up on keeping the current editions digitized. But prior to this, I did work at the Beardsley Library in Winstead, and we worked on a lot of digitization projects there. And I think, one of the main things that sprang from is that we were getting requests from all over the country and all over the world, to our research librarian there. So we knew we needed to make it accessible to more people. And I think the same things happened here at Scoville. I'll give you a little bit of background that I know about with the project here. It's Scoville Memorial has had a long time collaboration with the Lakeville Journal, which is our local newspaper. And so for decades, they've been working together to sort of archive the Lakeville Journal, both in the large bound copies of the journal and also on microfilm. So several years ago, they decided that they wanted to also get into digitization. And so now we have all of the past issues of the Lakeville Journal digitized, as well as up to 2021. And we also have the Connecticut Western News from 1871 to 1923, which is a newspaper that sort of predated and overlapped a bit with the Lakeville Journal. The Lakeville Journal we have from 1897 to 2021. And incidentally, the Lakeville Journal just celebrated its 125th birthday anniversary. And so there was a lot of festivity around that, and we were able to really take part and share some of what we have and have some fun with it. Some of the sharing some of the old sort of interesting things that were in the classifieds and that kind of thing. So that was good. So the process that has been used, the Lakeville Journal used to obtain all of the microfilm, and then the microfilm was sent off to a company called Advantage Preservation, which is now called Advantage Archives. And it is actually the company that we used at Beardsley as well. So I'm really familiar with them. And then they would convert everything to digital, and we would share it via a link on the library's website to what they call the Community History Archive, which is Advantage's platform, which makes it, searchable and accessible to the patrons. We also have access to several other digital newspapers through that, because the Lakeville Journal for a long time was sort of the parent company of some of the other local newspapers like the Winstead Journal and the Millerton News. So we have some copies of that as well. So we were using microfilm for the processing through Advantage, but then this past year when I started, we made the decision to no longer put the newspapers on microfilm. So instead, we obtained the PDFs from the Lakeville Journal. They have PDFs which we're able to send to Advantage on a flash drive. And then they convert it, and it's kind of the same process. They take the flash drive, they convert everything, they send the flash drive back to us and let us know when it's completed and everything's updated. And really the primary benefit of doing it that way, as far as we're concerned, is the cost. It was a lot more expensive for them to convert from the microfilm to digital. So for example, the Lakeville Journal is a once a week newspaper. And 1 year was approximately 1 reel of microfilm, and it cost about $500 to digitize that. So doing it with the PDFs, we can reduce the cost to about $300. So, you know, still pricey, but a little bit more, you know, doable. And also another benefit is with doing the PDFs, we can get a full color version of the modern newspapers, the modern editions. So that's really good. Overall, our experience with Advantage Preservation has been fantastic. Our local sales representative is named Grant Kessner, and he's very responsive and really helpful. And they take great care with everything we send to them. So that's been a really, you know, positive experience working with the company. So that's kind of where we are right now.
Okay, thanks so much, Karen. Thank you all for giving us a little bit of information about your individual projects, and it's good to see you each had a different vendor. You may have some little different like hosting options and maybe started from different places. So it's good to hear the variety, since a lot of you out here may be in a similar boat to one of those scenarios. So now I'm just going to try ask a few questions of the panel here to get a little bit more information about the project. So again, you were talking about working with your vendors on things. So I was just curious what internal labor you may have needed to use for your digitization project, any kind of, you know, staff setup or work that you may want to share with the group.
I could say from our point of view, it's been pretty minimal in terms of, you know, the labor involved. A lot of it is actually done by the Lakeville Journal, and we collaborate with them. You know, they do a lot of the compilation of everything, even prior to sending it just via the flash drives. They were doing most of the work to get everything together, to have everything put on microfilm. So.
Hey, Patrick or Sam, do you have anything to add to what other internal work might have been done outside of the vendor work?
Very little. Before we switched over to wholly digitalization, we were holding on to the weekly issues of Enfield Press. So I had my reference page, hold on to them and like keep the pristine copy, because we got 2 copies. There's always one that got mangled in our Dropbox, and one that was pristine. And so she would always try to make sure we had the most pristine one in our archives. And then at the end of the year, she was the one who packaged everything up and sent it to New England Micrographics. Once we sent everything over, sometimes we would remember to throw in the flash drive or the external hard drive, but really it was such a seamless process for us.
Great.
So I'm kind of at the point now where I feel like the little red hen. I've really kind of pushed this thing along and brought my librarianship to bear heavily with it in terms of breaking it down to all the component parts, finding the scanner, dealing with it. And I'm now at the point where I need to really get this last piece of getting the folks to pull the weeklies out of, you know, get away from the role of microfilm and make it weeklies again, and all of that's labor intensive. So the library and the historic, you know, Deep River is a small town, And all these towns are fairly small towns. It's a matter really of kind of figuring out, so who's going to want to help with this? It's going to take a while. It can be enjoyable, and it certainly is. I find it to be very satisfying, but I'm the kind of guy who likes to do these kind of tasks. At this point, it's the break the weeklies out of the PDF file, which is a microfilm roll. And then, as Sam was saying, upload, creating the metadata, which is not really particularly difficult, but it's the uploading it and then dealing with the, I'm not sure where things happen with CTDA. I upload it, for example, and then I have to go back and create the image off of the issues and create the PDF. It's not as automated as I would have liked to see it. I worked with Greg and Mike trying to do the spreadsheet option, but it never actually worked. I spent a lot of time on it. And finally, I just said, okay, this isn't working. I'm going to go ahead and do it one at a time, put up an issue at a time, an issue at a time. And I kind of look in the future of that, and the little red hen's continuing to grind the wheat. So it really has to do, I mean, this coming into this winter season is really when it's either going to happen or it's just going to putter along, quite frankly. I'm doing it because I think it's something that needs to be done. I'm not necessarily getting paid to do it, but I think it is a very, very critical piece of information that the areas in this, the towns in this area would really benefit from. So that's a real issue, is the labor piece and where how it gets done. So.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. And yeah, I do, we have for the CTDA, we've done a mix, even just working with Enfield. I was doing things before the spreadsheet came about. So my comfort level was doing the one issue at a time, but Anna has more experience on using the spreadsheet to get more content in. So I think it depends too on what kind of files you're starting with to come in with on what the steps are. But yeah, it's definitely a mix. So I want to switch gears a little bit from the technical, and Karen had mentioned with their paper, they happen to have the 100th anniversary of the paper. So that makes me think of like outreach and programming and so forth. So I was just curious if any of you have done anything for programming or, highlighting anything with your newspapers, with your public.
Well, I did mention, we just had the 125th anniversary of the Lakeville Journal. So that was kind of a great way to get the word out there that we have this available. But one thing we haven't done yet, but we're talking about, is we recently had all of the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders from the local school come visit the library, and they did a tour of, some of the, back rooms and hidden staircases, this really fun thing. And they really, really expressed an interest in the town. We have an area of the library called the vault, and you have to go in with a key, and it's a big heavy door. And that's actually where we have all of the Lakeville journals. So they were really intrigued by that. So we were going to talk with their, some of the teachers and things about maybe following up and doing some sort of a research program with the students. And it's great that we have it all digitized because they can do the work from the classroom. So.
Absolutely. And I know similar to we have the History Day competitions around the state. So hopefully a lot of the students can make use of our great primary local sources. So sounds good. Patrick or Sam?
I have visited with the high school and middle school libraries and librarians, a little bit premature, frankly, but I think it's important to create the relationship first between libraries. Honestly, I think that, the middle school and high school folks are really the people to get into first. These towns, all of the towns in this area, people have lived here for, I mean, the families are very old. They're very, very, it's not very transient, frankly. And so being able to, say, so who's your great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother, and so on and so forth, and be able to find that, there's always an interest there. So that's how we're going so far with it.
Most recently in Enfield, there is a historic movie theater that is actually being torn down. It's not in great shape, but it inspired the Historical Society to go and look and find the history of all the theaters in Enfield. And so we've been working with them, going through our archive and seeing, all the mentions of the newspapers, when the theaters went in, when they went down, and they've compiled this beautiful display that celebrates the theaters in Enfield. And while we're sad to see the Strand go away, they are really excited to show that here's a story about the theater closing, but what happened and what came after. So it does this really cool looking back and looking forward thing that I think is really cool.
That's excellent. I know obviously in the paper has a lot of probably the ads for the different movies and shows that were shown there. So that's a great way to partner up. Talking about like the vendors, you all seem to have some, good relationship working with your vendors, your various ones. So I'm just curious if you have any particular tips you'd like to share at all with the group on just working with a vendor.
Well, I'll go. So we were constrained by our budget, certainly, as to what we can digitize, how much of it at a time. For most of our digitization project, it was paid for by the library board, and they were exceedingly interested and generous because they knew how important it was to preserve this information and make it available and accessible. So the library board they have a budget. They knew how much money they were able to wiggle around with, and working with Mike, it was super easy to tell him very honestly, hey, I have this pot of money, how much would it cover? And he said, okay, well, we'll do this much, and then once we run out of money, we'll send the hard drive back to you. And that was really easy to work with. He was super flexible, constantly in communication. So I would say, hey, I got it approved. I'm sending out the the hard drive. Here's the shipping number, so you can track it in case it doesn't show up. During the digitization process in 2020, there were a lot of shipping issues, and Mike was absolutely lovely. He emailed me and said, oh, I finished this last batch. I'm not mailing it to you. And this was in December of 2020, and there were tons of shipping delays. And he said, you know what, I'm not comfortable sending this out to you like this. So I'm going to be in Springfield in a couple of weeks. Why don't I just drive it down to you? And so he was absolutely lovely to work with. And my library, like every other library I've worked in during the holiday season, was just overwhelmed with cookies. So for his labor of driving down our hard drive, I piled on a bucket of cookies onto him, for which he was really grateful.
That sounds good. I think, Nicole mentioned, I think she's had similar things trying to work with Mike, to where I think you've either met up to pick up things or so forth. So it is nice when the vendors are flexible like that. Patrick or Karen, any vendor tips you'd like to share?
I think Sam kind of said it. It's really, really key to have a personal relationship. And Robert Webb at the Charter Oaks has been very, very helpful, and we've reciprocated as well. Thinking ahead, it occurred to me at some point in my career that when Google and all the rest of them started in the internet archives and scanning all these large library collections, that the really key things ultimately, once those are done, are the very, very unique things that are in the historical societies, especially the historical societies of New England. So what I suggested to Roberta Gironda and at the Deep River Historical Society, and we've kind of talked about it, would be to have have the members sponsor a book, have a member sponsor something like 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 books from the collection every year, to have it scanned and line that up to work with the Charter Oak and get it scanned and get it. Nothing's going to happen fast. Nothing happens fast in these little towns, but it does happen. And it is quite interesting to see it happen, because especially then you build some ownership from the citizens, the members of the historical society, to having sponsored that particular book, to have it done. So I think that'll bear some fruit in a couple of years, and both with working with the vendor and sustaining that business, that local business that really can craft the schedule and craft what you want done to us, so we can get it done. So a personal approach is good.
Oh, I think you're muted, Karen.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted.
Sorry.
Yeah, I would sort of echo the same thing. Don't be afraid to reach out to these vendors and ask them questions and get them to work with you, because it can be kind of overwhelming at times, especially if you're just starting out and thinking about this huge project, like how are we going to be able to pay for this, and how are we going to get this done? And it's been my experience that they're really willing to work with you and maybe give you the big picture and then sort of break it down for you, about how you can accomplish your goal, whatever it is. And also, we had some fears at Beardsley, especially, not necessarily since I've been here, but about sending all of our precious, like items off to Iowa to these people. But they were, they were really great about reassuring us and making us feel comfortable about doing that. So yeah, I think that really having the personal relationship with the vendors is really helpful.
Gail, I know I'm not on the panel, but I do have some advice in this area, if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely, Nicole. I was going to say, you definitely would have some.
So, hi, everyone. If you haven't met me or seen me here before, I'm Nicole Beskier, the project coordinator for the Connecticut Digital Newspaper Project. So to go off of what Karen was saying, if you're nervous about sending your materials, don't be afraid to ask your vendor their process, how they handle things, how they store things. They're usually more than happy to walk you through that. I mean, anything that you need to feel more comfortable sending off your materials. And also, like Karen said, reach out to these vendors, contact them. And if you're really early in your project, but you're just trying to get an idea of like what the cost would be or what it's going to be like working with a vendor, when you reach out and make that initial contact, tell them we're still super early in the project. We are not at the point where we're actually doing it yet. We're early. We're just, fact finding, and they'll respect that. They're not going to hound you once you've reached out. If you just be upfront with them and tell them where you're at. Now, once you're getting close, they're going to get excited and they'll be like, yeah, we want to work with you. But in the beginning, if you just say like, we just need information, we're just trying to get an idea of how this even works, they're totally gonna give you all the information you need, but also not be like banging down your door trying to make that sale. They're respectful of your time, and they know that folks are busy and that these projects are usually unfortunately a side project and not your main focus. So I found that they're very respectful of that. So don't be afraid to ask those questions and be honest with them about where you're at and what you're looking for from them.
Thanks, Nicole.
One thing I did want to add, at one point we were looking for another vendor at Enfield for digitization. And that's when I put on my intellectual freedom hat and actually asked for the privacy policy, because there were certain larger national vendors whose digitization, while was cheaper, did some funny things with the information that went onto data aggregating sites that I was wholly uncomfortable with and did not align with the library's privacy policy. So that was something I did ask of certain vendors when I was soliciting information, was what their privacy policy was, if they had a privacy policy, and what happened to the data, and whether or not that went to third parties as well.
Continuing on, kind of just this thought on looking at different vendors. If Patrick or Karen, did you look at other vendors as well, or how did you select the one that was chosen for this project?
Well, they had already been using Advantage here. Gosh, I'm trying to remember now because we started quite a while ago at Beardsley how we ended up going with Advantage. And I think we had looked at a couple of different, but at that time there weren't very many to choose from. And I have to say it must have come down to cost and just the way that they were willing to work with us.
And I think their model was probably unique too at the time, right, Karen? There weren't as many one-stop shops previously as there are now.
Right, right. And we definitely needed something that was going to be, you know, less work for the staff.
So in Deep River, the decision had more or less been made by the Historical Society, and it was really based on an offer that Robert had made to the Historical Society to scan in exchange for the equipment. And he got the equipment. He realized it was really ancient and was able to, as I said, purchase a new, very nice piece of equipment in order to expedite it. By that time, Robert and I had a good relationship built. I was educating him as much about scanning standards and the whole piece. So he was aware of that. I think I even gave him his technician a copy of the Image Magic manual that I'd been carting around for several decades, but because he didn't really know about it, you know, he didn't really know what the underpinnings of the software were. So that's really how it started, and I continue to believe that, you know, support your local businesses. It's a big thing in this area, and it really is a good thing. So support your local businesses, and it'll pay off.
Thank you all. Switching gears again, before we end up kind of opening it up to the whole, like all the attendees for questions, I just wanted to know if you could, each of you, just share like one of your either favorite or most interesting things that you found in your digitized newspapers.
I think that, and it really has to do with where I'm looking in the 103 years of newspapers, but I happen to be in the period must have been around 1917, 1918, 19, and which was when the Spanish flu was decimating this country. And what I find so compelling about this weekly is how personal it is, and how, you know, World War I was just over, and so mothers and fathers were publishing the letters from their sons that had come over from Europe. So when the letter had shown up, they'd taken it into the newspaper, and it made the front page news because everybody knew that person, you know, and it just kind of continued to build that sense of community, not just in Saybrook at the time, but also all of those, you know, these were people were fishermen, and, you know, and on and on and on, shipbuilders and the whole thing. So it really was a snapshot into a different time.
Absolutely. Sam or Karen?
Yeah, I think, particularly recently as we were going through things for the 125th anniversary of the journal, we had so much fun. I mean, the staff, we were like laughing hysterically at some of the things that, at the time were like so important to the townspeople and so, like interesting to them, like, Farmer McGuire found a mole with red eyes in his field, or we have the lake in Lakeville, and they wanted people like whistle for wind this Sunday as we have our sailing competition. And so just like those glimpses into small town rural life in this area are really I think quite interesting. And also we do love to read old articles about the library, so
there you go. Sam?
Karen, your story reminded me of one that my coworker had found, in which it was an obituary that a patron had asked for a distant relative, and because small town newspapers, they have the wildest things, and so this gentleman was killed by a lightning strike in the buttery of his house. We were just very confused. I'm like, was he indoors? Was he outdoors? What's a buttery? What was he doing in the buttery? Because then the story just sort of went sideways from there after, like, oh no, we found this like broken statue, the church is really upset, to then like, there's teenagers that hang out in the woods over there, and I'm sure they were up to no good because I'm pretty sure they're Satanists. And it's so indicative of the time that he's like, oh, was there the patron was hoping for a picture of the desecrated statue, and I'm like, I don't think they're going to put that in there. But he was really pleased to see the article and had a good laugh with it, and took it to his friends and was able to say, it's like, look, we're the Satanists.
Yeah, you never know what you find in these things. I'll share one kind of funny story. One of our staff members, when we first digitized our first papers, I guess in his family going back like generations, this big like kind of family story about like this robbery that happened and all that, and he actually found something in our papers, but what he ended up finding was what the total opposite was. It turned out his family member was the robber. It wasn't the other way around, so he had to go back and tell like the family. So you just never know what you find in these local papers, but it's just great when you stumble upon these things. So yeah, you can they're great to go through. So I know I totally enjoy it. So thank you all so much for these questions. I think we'll just kind of open it up to anybody attending here to ask any of the panelists, or myself. Nicole's here with me. I'm not sure if Anna is on with us, but if any of us can answer questions for you about any of your digitization needs.
I think that, if you have a question, feel free to like turn on your video if you feel like showing your face. I have everything in gallery mode now, so I can see everyone, I think. So you're welcome to raise your hand. You can pop questions in the chat. There was one question that came through that I will lob to you folks. But, please, everyone who's here, this is your opportunity to, have a bigger conversation and get your burning questions from this series answered from people who have actually done this. So we'd love to hear from you. So Leah asks, I'm curious whether those who have used CTDA have found their built-in OCR software Tesseract to be adequate, or if you're doing other things to kind of improve that. I think this is a question about like, how well is that working for the folks who are using CTDA?
So this has been a problem. This has been an issue that I've been looking at because I'm kind of fascinated with the whole notion of it. I've come to realize there's been a number of studies about this. We're dealing with newspapers, so the quality of the paper and the early paper has to be called into question. The quality of the presses has to be called into. There's all kinds of reasons why the OCR is spotty. I went ahead and purchased Abby, I suppose, especially because it provided with the opportunity of building your own dictionary. And my notion was that if I spent time building the dictionary, I would have images of all the type that had been used to do the thing. And I spent a fair amount of time fiddling around with this and test it. You can go in and you can look at the text and you can see how good it is. And then you kind of say, well, it's kind of good, but it really isn't really good. And it implies that, if you do OCR and the person looks for something, that they got it all, but of course they don't have it all. There's really no way to read what's there until you read what's there. So I'm at this kind of conundrum where I decided, well, it doesn't seem to be any better that after I'd spent all this time doing it, any better than what I get off of the CTDA. Now I have a problem of, do I even do it, or do I not do it and tell people why I'm not doing it? It is a conundrum. What I'm expecting is that as time goes forward, I'm kind of in the 1800s, kind of right at the 1900s. I'd love to find the business records of this business to see when they purchased new presses and all the rest of it. But and maybe that'll happen. You never know what's in a historical society. But I'm kind of at the point now of saying, okay, I'm basically going to do a test every decade to see whether the OCR is appropriate to what I'm trying to do with this and go forward with that. But in answer to your question, Leah, having used Abby, which is kind of perhaps maybe the state of the art, especially after going through hours of trying to build my own dictionary for Abby, I don't see it to be any better or any worse than what Tesseract, and Tesseract has very good reputation from what I've been able to look at in the literature. So that's my experience.
Great, thank you, Patrick. That's really
Happy to
helpful.
speak on this a little bit as well. So historic newspapers are notoriously difficult to OCR. I think that newspapers might be some of the more difficult printed textual documents to OCR. OCR software is essentially designed for ideal conditions. So even the Library of Congress, the newspapers that we digitized for CDMP and then put on Library of Congress's Chronicling America, we are required to OCR, but they don't look at the quality. They don't have a benchmark for quality because they know that it's going to vary greatly. As Patrick said, your source material is really kind of where things start. Tesseract is becoming, I think it's, they're really improving the software a lot. And I think Library of Congress is actually going to change their specifications on it. And Gail, didn't they say they're going to start allowing awardees to use Abby, FineReader, or Tesseract? So that goes to say, if Library of Congress is allowing it to be used for newspapers that are going into their database, it's a good software because they have the top specification, technical specifications for digitization of historic newspapers. So that's just OCR with historic newspapers is going to be a toss-up no matter what software you're using. So I think you can feel, and Anna can speak more to this, and Gail as well. I think you can feel confident in what you're getting out of CTDA, that it, it's of quality. And always remember, I think Greg said this last week, something is better than nothing.
Perhaps.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would underscore that, Nicole. I don't think anyone on the researcher side expects OCR to be perfect. What you want is something that is keyword searchable enough to find most of the stuff that you're interested in, right? That kind of gets you to the right place. So, like having a bit that even if there are errors, and often if you're looking at it, like, I don't know, some of the examples that Greg was showing, I think last week that we saw, like you can see where the errors are coming, but it's still visually readable to a person, if not a computer,
Correct.
right? A slash and an apostrophe have been substituted for a character, but there are things about it that, like even it doesn't have to be perfect to be doing exactly what it needs to be doing.
Yeah. Yes, that is very important
Yeah.
to remember.
There was a recent study that I can't remember who did it, but they compared Abby versus Tesseract versus Adobe Acrobat Pro in terms of how, in a few different criteria in terms of the quality of the OCR that was produced running the same documents through those types of software. So if you're interested in sort of like the technical background and understanding how they put that study together, I'll see if I can find the link to that and drop it in the chat for anybody who's interested in looking at that further.
Honestly, I think breaking this sounds strange, but it sounds so simplistic, but it breaking the roles down into weeklies seems to me to be a more of an important task than worrying about OCR. Most people, when they come in, they're looking for a particular time period. It would be nice to be able to say, where is the body that I'm looking for, but really kind of breaking it down to say, okay, look at this 4-page, as I've worked with folks with this over the years, the newspaper publishes the structure to the newspaper. And so you're always going to go to page 2 to find whatever it is you're going to find about your region, and then you'd be a fool not to read it, and just assume that the machine can find it. That's not what researchers do.
Patrick, that's such an important point because, we've been running 2 series concurrently right now. We've been doing this one on newspaper digitization, and we've been doing one on kind of like Archives 101. And, I think thinking about this in kind of an archival way, where you're trying to create an aid to research, kind of like a finding aid, you're trying to do enough so that the researcher doesn't have to spend forever locating the piece in which, the container in which they're going to find what they're interested in, right? You have to give them enough guidance, but you don't have to give it to them on a plate with whipped cream on top. You're giving them, you're guiding them. So that's such a wonderful point. So thank you for making it. I think, shifting our, I think especially in the museum field, we're often used to item level cataloging and you have to have everything about every single item. And I think thinking about this in a more archival sort of way, where you're thinking about scope and content, where you're thinking about it in chunks, and how do we chunk it out in a way that helps lead the researcher to what they're trying to find. And with newspapers, it's always going to almost, there's subject stuff, but a lot of it is chronological. Anybody who's going to a newspaper to do research, at least, this is what I was always taught in my history classes, is newspapers are great, but it's a needle in a haystack unless you've got a period of time that you can look through, because you can't expect to do anything but be paging through a lot of stuff. So I think that, being able to find that sweet spot between the expectations and then what you can reasonably do with the resources and human power that you have at your disposal, that's where we should be aiming for. So I love that comment. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, who's got questions? Come on. Yeah, Leah has put a point in. It's not a needle in a haystack if you had really accurate plain text. True. But then think of what you would miss as a researcher in terms of context and that research experience of reading through more than just only the articles that are relevant to you. In my experience doing newspaper research, what is so rich is being able to see not just that article, but that article in the context of the entire page. What else is happening in this community, right? And that helps you understand these things in ways that just really give you the context in ways that nothing else really can. So, I'm really a big believer in the serendipity of the search. And of that research process, whether it's wandering through the library stacks or having to do a bit of paging through stuff in order to find what you're looking for. You learn something about the community and about the moment in time that you're talking about that may surprise you. So I think that's it might be faster to only just keyword search for everything. But I think you miss a lot if you don't go through that browsing, do some of the browsing. Browsing has a value. I love browsing.
I agree with Leah. It would be wonderful if it were plain text, but if you think of the quality of cheap paper in 1880, it wasn't very good. You know, it was crap. Actually, you wrapped your fish in it at the end of the day. You know, if you think of the quality of the presses and the people who were running the presses, I mean, looking at the stuff that I'm looking at, I see really bad printing, quite frankly. You know, the quality of the printing is not of the print man, the person who's running it, and didn't pull that sheet because it was crap, but let it go through, and then it ended up under the camera, and then it ended up with the digitizing thing. That's just the reality of life, is that you know, if it were plain text, and I spent hours trying to get to plain text, days, and finally just said, well, okay, think about what's going on in this little shop over in Chester, you know, running a no electricity, running a, you know, some kind of belt to make the thing go around. And so what I say is that as I go forward, I'll test it to see how close I can get to good plain text. But it isn't in 1880, it isn't in 1890, it isn't really in 1910 or those areas. So we'll see what happens. I think that's the skill of the professional librarian or the technician who's doing it, quite frankly.
I just love that what you're saying about kind of calling our attention to those material conditions about the printing. Like, you know, we think of newspapers, it's like reporters, they're writing stuff, oh, and then it gets printed, right? But I think that, you know, all of the challenges that we meet, like they pull us back to those physical material conditions of printing a newspaper itself, making the paper, you know, setting the type, you know, whether you're doing that by hand or you've got a line of type. And then, you know, who's running the printing machine and what does that press look like and what's powering it? I mean, I think that's a really powerful statement about, you know, just like the other things that you learn by proxy in reading through newspapers. So there's a question about from Christine about when you're digitizing, what are you getting? Are you digitizing the whole page or are you digitizing just an article? Can you folks talk a bit more about that? I assume it's mostly by page.
Yeah.
That you're looking at pages, but.
When I was playing around with Abby in the beginning, what it does is it scans the whole page and then it breaks it down into articles, and you're kind of going through the article and you're saying, how much time do I want to spend making this article a plain text, pure plain text? And you kind of come down to the point of saying, well, short of editing it all, it's never going to happen. So it's both, actually, you know, at least with Abby. I don't know what about TestRec, but I suspect that they're chunking it out as well in the software. And you had something about that level of technology. I don't really know, but I suspect it's breaking it into blocks and then going through. I don't know.
Yeah, I think she's talking more about not the OCR, which you do have to kind of figure out where the different chunks of text are in order to do that properly. You know, it was my impression that Christine was talking about, like, what are you getting back? Are you digitizing the whole page? But maybe she was talking about OCR. I'm not sure. I can't think of an instance where you wouldn't be scanning the entirety of a page, and then anything you might want to do to separate things out into, you know, discrete articles would have to be done in some kind of post-processing, post-production.
Yeah, I think there's some vendors that might do like an article segmentation, but that's, you know, it's another, like some like the bigger like newspaper platforms that's what they're made for, would have that type of piece to it. But in general, and obviously Nicole and Anna could talk more about the scanning piece, but it's been really by page.
Yeah, the standard is to scan by page, and all the vendors, if a vendor is experienced in newspaper digitization, that's what they should automatically be doing. Now for pricing, they'll quote you either by reel or by page. It just depends on the vendor and their setup. But yeah, so, and typically you have all your files, like it's per page for your files. And then some vendors do offer to create a multi-page PDF per issue for you as well. But yeah, because the intent here, other than access, you have to remember is preservation, which Anna talked about last week. Or the week before, 2 weeks before, 3 weeks before, but you're trying to preserve the newspaper as a whole, the page as a whole, and so yeah, so for scanning you would digitize an entire page. And then yeah, a lot of the platforms also offer the ability then for your users to come in and clip article, as opposed to if they don't want to save the whole page, they just want to save like an article. A lot of platforms have that functionality as well. Oh, and Christine, I saw your comment that you have a lot of newspapers on microfilm that you would love to have digitized. Definitely feel free to reach out to us at the State Library if you have any questions about the process, about getting started. Gail, Anna, and I are always available to, you know, point people in the right direction, provide advice, share, you know, information from the projects we have going on at the State Library, how we do things, so.
And I'm just going to add, if there's anybody else that's on the call today who is actually either thinking about doing a project or is in the middle of one that maybe we don't know about, feel free to put it in the chat or just let us know what you're doing here. It'd be great to know. Oh, there we go. Anna just put in chat about that study comparing the OCR software.
Yeah, I was able to find
Thank
the
you.
link. So that just compared some of the main software. And it was a study done by specifically for librarians and archivists, which is very nice. Because a lot of like the OCR quality things that you can find are all like very like businessy. Or sort of like, you know, business records and types things like that. And this is specifically pertinent to us and what we do.
Oh, that's great. Well, does anyone just want to unmute and talk about kind of like your ambitions at your site too? Christine's got another question while people are contemplating that.
No, they do not.
Vendors take care of copyright.
No, they do not. Christine, we did the second webinar was on copyright. And we had Hope O'Keefe from the Library of Congress talk, and she's like the expert on historic newspaper copyright. I highly recommend you watch it if you have time. I know we talk a lot, and so it makes the videos lengthy, but Hope's portion was maybe like 40 minutes. And it's like, she'll tell you, it's all the ins and outs. And then also we do our own copyright checks at the State Library. We have to do that as part of our grant program. So I'm also happy to answer questions about actually doing the process. As I cannot provide you legal advice, but I can try to help explain the legalities as well if you have questions on that. But I can also totally speak to actually performing the research.
I want to mention that because the newspaper of record in Enfield folded, we actually did reach out to the company that bought it and said, hey, do we have permission to digitize, host this, put it up online? And they're like, we don't care. And so we do. We have for Enfield, we have the permission to do the full run up to 2020 because nobody wants to do that work or even thought to like, we reached out to them and they're like, we bought it, but we're not continuing the newspaper. We have no interest whatsoever. So you might run into that as well.
Those are the best kind of publishers.
I mean, in a way, we don't
Yeah.
care. We're not going to publish this. We just bought it. We don't
Yeah.
want it to continue.
We're not
we
worried
don't
about it.
care.
Yeah.
And because they were bought out, we were actually exceedingly lucky because they reached out to our library and said, hey, do you want the bound copies? And up till that point, we at some point did. They were kept in a damp basement and they mildewed. So we got their bound archives, and then we've got like archives of like other newspapers as well. And we reached out to those libraries and said, hey, we don't have room, but here's your newspaper. Do you want it? And they're like, absolutely. So that was really nice too.
the upsides of the liquidization of local newspapers.
Yeah.
Well, at least they're going somewhere and not throwing them away.
Yeah.
Does anyone else want to talk a little bit about like projects that you're, like why you're here and, the sorts of projects that you're contemplating? I think this is a great place where we can kind of forge some connections and, partnerships potentially, or just work through some of the things that you may be finding intimidating or concerned about, or any follow-up questions from the series so far. There can't be none. Start calling on people.
Hi, yeah, it's Christine.
Great, Christine.
Yeah,
thank you.
well, no, the reason I just wanted to say something is I don't know how many other people who are on this webinar are in the same situation that I am. I work for the Enfield Public Library and I'm the local history coordinator. So I'm the one who does a lot of the research. People need help. I take care of the collection. And there are all of these projects that my brain is just filled with that I'd love to do for the library. But unfortunately, I'm only here 25 hours a week and I'm the only person. So, I mean, I would love to, and I love these webinars and I love to learn and find, okay, well, there's possibilities. But I guess the truth of it is too, that I'm running into, it's like, I just don't have enough hours in my life to do some of these things. So, and I have had a company or a vendor approach me about digitizing the microfilms. And of course, those were the questions, about, because the microfilms we have is for the Evening Sentinel. And our microfilms go back to the 1890s up until 1992, when the paper like that other situation was bought out, I believe, by the Connecticut Post. And then they shut down the paper. So it's a no longer thing. So it's like, where do we go from here? You see what I mean? So I just don't know. Is there anybody else who's like in a conundrum like we are as far as wanting to do these things, but it just isn't working right now?
I know how I found myself, frankly. I mean, this had been bumping around for quite a while. Everybody knew about the new era, but I don't think anybody really kind of wanted to pick it up. So it's kind of it's a mission of, it's a service thing from my point of view. I'm really anxious about finding others in the area to help do it. But that's a different set of skills than what I have. I can be the educator and educate people how to do it and do all the library science kind of stuff of the workflow and how to do it and all this kind of stuff. But ultimately, it's a rah-rah kind of thing to get people to do it for free, to understand that there's a service aspect of it. That's why I'm actually looking at the retiree community, because, most of those people are, many of them are looking for something to do other than just, sit around. So,
I think
what you're saying, Christine.
Go ahead, Karen.
totally
I don't want to
agree.
jump in. I think what Christine's question suggests are like, what are some strategies that folks have used to help? We all feel under-resourced. There's too many things that we want to do and not enough time or staff around to do them. So what are some of the strategies that you've used, and what are some of the grants that you could apply for to help get some of those resources that you might need? That's the suggestion that suggests itself to me from what Christine was saying, and Patrick as well.
Yeah, I'm going to just jump in. Actually, how we got started with this entire thing of the newspapers in general, probably like a dozen years or so ago. We were in a different project, Treasures of Connecticut Libraries, where we were working with Library Connection. We had a small kind of grant amount to work with libraries and who they partnered with their historical societies or other history organizations in their towns to just be able to like digitize any kind of like objects they had, which were mostly like photographs and postcards and so forth. But as we kept going around the state talking about this, everyone was always asking about newspapers. So we knew it was its own kind of thing. We had a very small little pot of money and just decided just to do this like little pilot of project Newspapers of Connecticut with just what we had on site, a little bit of money, worked with a vendor and just kind of getting started, like learning about the process. And it ended up just ballooning because of like, interest and so forth with everybody wanting to, work more. Then you start looking for grant money to kind of expand the project and then get more staff on it and so forth. So I think even if you just have a little bit to start on, it could get like your town excited about, what you've put up, and maybe others might reach out to help. Maybe more staffing would become available to get put on that project if it's something that's seen as an important thing. So sometimes you don't have to be going like, oh my God, we have this 100-year run of this paper. But even if you start small, sometimes it won't seem as overwhelming and maybe not needing so much staff time in the beginning.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, like a lot of what Gail just said and Patrick is really true in my experiences. It can be really overwhelming, but if you sort of prioritize, and what's going to be most important to your community initially, like to have access to, and utilize volunteers if you need to have that, person power. And also reach out to what we did at Beardsley is we reached out to the community foundation, like the local community foundation for a grant, and they were really supportive. The Friends of the Library were really supportive of the initiative. So, there's support out there, I think, for these types of projects beyond what, like the bigger grants that maybe are just too much. And even like applying for the grant is too much work to, to take on. So start small.
Yeah, Karen mentioned, I know some like libraries with the Friends, like maybe they have their, certain fundraisers they could have as this is earmarked to go towards the digitization project or something, where you can have it just like designated to go towards something and that would again get the town excited about having something like this done. So, but yeah, start small.
Honestly, even when I sat in on the copyright session and when Nicole said 1926, I thought, oh, I can probably, just do a skunk works, a kind of a thing so that people can see that it can be done, and done. It's not going to be fast, but it can be done. It's a matter of sitting down and, ingesting a few things into the server, and so it actually does kind of move along. But just seeing 1926 in the public domain kind of took an enormous amount of anxiety off of me. How am I going to do this whole thing up to 1960? The numbers just get to be crazy, but it really is just a step at a time, honestly. And the notion of a workflow and how it kind of moves forward and how you can just chunk it along is really key. So it's doable. It's just not doable very quickly. So I have a question.
Go ahead, Patrick.
I've been trying to figure out, this is really kind of a cultural, political kind of a situation of working with 8 towns. Right now, I'm doing all of this on the Deep River Library site on CTDA. And I know that's going to create some tension with the other towns. And the logic would be to do to make a new era CTDA site that, a site not for a town, because the way CTDA right now is pretty much by towns. There are a few other places, but I don't see any instances on CTDA of objects like the New Era, which is 8 towns. It would be a whole lot easier for me to talk to the library directors and the historical society people and say, it's not going to be on the Deep River site, because then you get this whole thing of, well, why is it on the Deep River Library site? You know what I'm saying with this. It's political and cultural. But then just have everybody in the various member towns to work on it and then share it to their own sites. I tend to look at CTTA as the Deep River Digital Library more than an archive, because I'm a librarian. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm really more about sharing information than archiving information. Both are important. Are there things?
I
on
would just
CTTA?
suggest talking to CTDA. They've been creating curated collections, and I think that they have a new repository manager that they've just hired in the past couple of months.
Right.
And I know that, they're always receptive to input from their users.
Yeah,
So if there's functionality that I think because CTDA has thought of itself as kind of organized by repository, like that's kind of, because the idea is to point everybody back to the holding institution eventually. Like the researchers, they use it for discoverability, but then, there's a breadcrumb trail that leads them back to the place where they can actually find this stuff. But that's a really important thought about, like your needs on the user side in creating collaborations that can help you get more stuff on CTDA, getting buy-in from other organizations. Is there a way to say, like, this newspaper is brought to you by all of these libraries, in the participating towns?
Correct.
I'm just going to add, like we have in the CTDA, we have our Newspapers of Connecticut collection set up, but say like for like Enfield example with the Thompsonville Press, Enfield also has their own space on the CTDA where that Thompsonville Press can live, but it's also shared with the Newspapers of Connecticut. So people could find it like either place. So maybe it's some kind of arrangement they could work where if the other towns all have their own spot and maybe it could be shared with that. Plus we'd love to have it shared in the bigger just Newspapers of Connecticut collection as well. So they could definitely work with what would logically make sense for like, sharing it and so forth. So it's findable in different places.
Yeah. So that's database magic, that's database magic, but it's the other side. And I hear what you're saying. And I suspect, when I talk to Greg and I think Michael Hauser is the new database guy, when I talk to them and kind of say, okay, how about this? And, we're going to have, because I need to bring more staff on. I need to figure out how to deal with shadow staff who aren't getting paid. And then share it back to the individual town repositories so that they're, people in Deep River go to the Deep River site, but it's all ends up in the Digital Public Library of America, I think, ultimately. So because it's all database magic, there's something in there that says, share me, but yeah.
This is in response also to Leah's suggestions as well, like, and don't feel bad. I don't know, like, don't feel too bad about bugging Greg and Michael about this. Is like, like they want feedback from the users. There's nothing better than a really engaged and responsive user community because it shows people are using your stuff, right? They're using the platform and they have ideas about it. So, I really would encourage those of you who have particular feedback for CTDA to go ahead and reach out, and it may not be something they can do like tomorrow, but I know if they're anything like us here at at CLHO and Connecticut Collections, we're always trying to think about, functionality that we can add and figure out where to find the funds in order to implement that. Yeah. So, we always have a wish list. I'm sure CTDA has a wish list. Add your stuff to the wish list. Yeah. Anybody else want to share a little bit about where you are and some of the challenges you're facing to get some input from the folks who are here at the table today? Okay, well, hearing nothing, I'm going to say that it's almost 1:30, so I think we can wrap up today. Thank you so much to Patrick, Karen, and Sam for sharing your experiences. To Gail for the excellent moderated panel, and for for the resources and ideas that you shared as well. Thanks to Anna and Nicole for your constant goodwill and and support and willingness to help people out, and all of the resources that you shared. I want to give a special thanks to Emily Garfinkel here at CLHO, who has worked really hard behind the scenes to put this together, this program series together, in collaboration with the folks at CDNP, I guess, and the State Library. So let's give a little round of applause to Emily, who's been recording, doing all the follow-up, and capturing everything so that this can continue to be a resource for the community. I know that the folks at the Connecticut Digital Newspaper Project are really eager to hear from folks who want to digitize their newspapers. So if you're thinking of embarking on a project, contact Nicole and Anna and Gail. We can make sure that their email addresses go out in the kind of final follow-up email that Emily sends. Emily, if you'd be so kind as to do that. Because I know that we're really hoping that that this series will create some good connections and collaborations and help those of you who are at collecting institutions, especially smaller ones who may feel like this is a little bit beyond your depth. Like, we're trying to connect you with the resources that are out there, the expertise, the experience, any hand-holding that you need. How to work with we've covered a lot of different topics here, but still embarking on that project can be our hurdle. So we want to lower the bars to participation, and we want to make sure that you have someone to reach out to when you have questions. Feel free to reach out to us here at CLHO if you have questions, and we will also work to connect you to the right people to answer your question, because we don't know everything, but we know a lot of people who know a lot of things. So I want to thank everyone here. Again, thanks to those of you who have been attending religiously. It's been great to see your names over and over from week to week. And thank you so much again to the Connecticut Digital Newspaper Project and to all of our guests over the course of the series, and the excellent advice that you have given. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this for our community.